You need to understand you were not brought into an avoidance life by accident, and you were not brought in just to be another chapter they forget. You were brought in because your presence carried something they didn't know how to hold. Real closeness. Not the kind of closeness that stays on the surface, not the kind that feels exciting only when it's uncertain, but the kind that is steady. The kind that looks someone in the eyes and says, I'm here, I'm not playing, I'm not running, I want something real. And for someone who has learned to survive by keeping people at a distance, that kind of love doesn't just feel beautiful, it feels dangerous because it touches the very place they've been protecting their whole life. You need to understand, avoidant people don't run because you were too much. They run because your closeness forces them to feel what they've been avoiding. They might look calm on the outside, they might even look confident, but inside, closeness can trigger a quiet alarm. It's not always logical. It's nervous system, it's memory, it's the old belief that needing someone will end in disappointment, or shame, or control, or loss. So when you show up with consistency, when you show up with softness, when you show up with sincerity, they feel warmth, yes, but they also feel exposure. They feel the risk of being seen. They feel the risk of being needed. They feel the risk of losing control. And the moment the connection starts getting real, the moment it starts moving from chemistry into commitment, from attraction into intimacy, from fun into depth, their instinct is to pull away. Not because the love isn't there, but because fear rises faster than love in a heart that was trained to protect itself. And that's why your role in their life is bigger than you think. Because you didn't just offer them a relationship, you offered them a new experience of closeness. You showed them what it feels like when someone doesn't disappear emotionally, when someone doesn't weaponize love, when someone doesn't make them earn basic care. You gave them a taste of safety. And safety is the very thing an avoidant secretly wants, but often doesn't trust. They might say they want space. They might say they want freedom. They might say they don't like labels, but what they're really afraid of is what closeness requires. Vulnerability, accountability, staying present when it's uncomfortable. Your love brought them to the edge of that. It brought them to the moment where they had to choose, keep running, or learn to stay. You need to understand, when an avoidant meets someone they can truly feel with, it disrupts their system. It challenges the story they've been living inside. The story that says, I'm fine on my own, I don't need anyone. Feelings complicate things. Love is a trap. Because suddenly they do feel. Suddenly they do miss you. Suddenly they do care. And that is when the confusion starts. Because caring makes them feel out of control. Caring makes them feel like they're standing on ground that could collapse. They may not have the tools to communicate that fear, so instead they retreat. They go quiet. They act distant. They become inconsistent. Not always to punish you, but to calm themselves. Distance becomes their way of breathing again, and you are left there, holding all the questions, wondering how someone can feel so close one day and so far the next. And here is the part that will break your heart and heal it at the same time. You were brought into their life to show them what they've been running from, and you were brought in to show yourself what you deserve. Because loving an avoidant can make you question yourself. It can make you feel like you're asking for too much when you ask for basic communication. It can make you feel needy when you ask for consistency. It can make you feel dramatic when you ask for reassurance. You start trying to become easier to love. You start editing your feelings. You start swallowing your needs. You start turning your heart into something smaller, just so they don't feel overwhelmed. And you call it compromise. But slowly you lose yourself. You lose your voice. You lose your peace, and you were not brought into their life to lose you. You need to understand, sometimes your love enters someone's life like a light, not to fix them, not to rescue them, but to reveal what intimacy feels like, to reveal what a safe connection looks like, to reveal the cost of emotional avoidance. Because when you stop chasing, when you stop pleading, when you stop performing love to earn love, it forces them to face something they don't like to face, consequences. Not revenge, not punishment, consequences. The consequence of distance is disconnection. The consequence of silence is loss. The consequence of inconsistency is that you eventually choose yourself. And for an avoidant, that can be the moment they finally see what they had and what they kept pushing away. But listen to me. Because this is important, you are not responsible for whether they learn the lesson. You are not responsible for whether they change. You are not responsible for whether they finally become emotionally brave. Your job is not to prove that love can survive anything. Your job is to protect your heart, your dignity, your life. You were brought into their life to offer something real, and you did. If they couldn't hold it, that does not make your love worthless. It makes their fear louder than their readiness. And that is painful, but it is not your fault. You need to understand the most powerful part of your story is not that you loved them, it's that you can love and still choose yourself. You can care and still walk away from confusion. You can miss them and still not return to the same cycle. Because your love is not meant to be a place where you keep bleeding quietly. Your love is meant to be mutual. It is meant to be safe. It is meant to be something that builds you, not something that breaks you. And if your presence in their life revealed closeness, then let your absence reveal standards. Let it reveal what happens when a person finally stops begging for love to behave like love and starts living like they matter. You need to understand, sometimes you are brought into someone's life as a mirror. Not to shame them, not to expose them in a cruel way, but to reflect back the truth they have spent years avoiding. And if you loved an avoidant, you already know how strange that feels because you didn't walk into their world thinking, I'm going to teach this person a lesson. You walked in with softness. You walked in with curiosity. You walked in with the simple hope that love could be safe, that connection could be easy, that two people could meet in the middle and build something real. But what happened instead is that you found yourself face to face with a pattern that didn't start with you, but that you were chosen to reveal. You need to understand, avoidant people often survive by calling their emotional walls strength. They call their distance independence. They call their silence peace. They call their disappearing acts needing space. And sometimes they believe it. Because when you've lived your whole life avoiding vulnerability, you don't see your coping as a problem. You see it as who you are. You see it as maturity. You see it as control. And control feels safe. But then you came into their life, and your presence didn't fit into the story they tell themselves. Your sincerity didn't match the games they were used to. Your consistency didn't match the on and off rhythm they knew how to manage. You weren't just another person who would accept the half version of them. You made closeness feel possible, and that is what threatened their identity. You need to understand, the mirror isn't just what you say, it's what you are. When you show up with emotional honesty, when you communicate, when you ask real questions, when you want clarity, you quietly reveal how much they avoid. When you say, I miss you, you reveal how hard it is for them to say it back. When you ask for a conversation, you reveal how much they rely on shutting down. When you ask for consistency, you reveal how much they've been living comfortably in inconsistency. It's not that you were trying to corner them. It's that your standards made their habits visible. Your love made their fear visible. Your steady presence made their disappearing act look exactly like what it is, an escape. And here is the painful part, because being a mirror is exhausting. You start questioning yourself. You start wondering if you're too intense, too emotional, too needy, too much. You start thinking, maybe I should be cooler, maybe I should talk less, maybe I should want less, maybe I should accept the silence and call it normal. You start shrinking your needs so you don't trigger their retreat. You become careful with your words, careful with your feelings, careful with your love, as if love is something that must be measured in teaspoons, because if you pour too much, they will run, and that's when the relationship stops being a partnership and starts being a performance. You need to understand, your presence in their life was a disruption because you didn't just accept the surface, you wanted depth. And depth is exactly what an avoidant both craves and fears. They crave it because it feels like home when it's safe. They fear it because it feels like danger when it's demanded. So they live in a push and pull. They come close, then they panic. They soften, then they freeze. They give you a glimpse of the real them, then they disappear behind the wall again. And you, because you have a heart, you keep holding onto the glimpses, hoping the glimpses will become a life. You keep thinking, if I'm patient enough, if I'm loving enough, if I'm understanding enough, they will stay. But the truth is, love doesn't grow in a place where one person is always bracing for the other to leave. You need to understand, the reason you were brought into their life as a mirror is because your love revealed their pattern so clearly that they could no longer pretend it was just who they are. Your love showed them that the problem is not closeness itself. The problem is the fear they attach to closeness. Your love showed them that they don't just need space. They use space to avoid accountability. Your love showed them that they don't just hate drama, they avoid conversations that require emotional responsibility. And even if they never admit it to you, even if they never say it out loud, you forced a question into their life, a question they can't unsee once it's there. Why do I run when something is real? And here's the twist: you are also a mirror for yourself, because loving someone avoidant often reveals your own patterns too. It reveals how much you overgive. It reveals how quickly you abandon your needs to keep someone. It reveals how you might confuse intensity with love, uncertainty with excitement, longing with connection. It reveals how you can become addicted to the moment they return, because their return feels like relief. It feels like being chosen again. It feels like winning. But love isn't supposed to feel like winning. It's supposed to feel like resting. And when you realize that, something inside you changes. You start seeing the cycle for what it is. You start seeing how much of your life is being spent trying to earn what should be freely given. You need to understand your role was not to fix them. Your role was to reveal. And revelation is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for them because it strips away their excuses. It's uncomfortable for you because it forces you to stop romanticizing inconsistency. It forces you to stop calling breadcrumbs progress. It forces you to stop waiting for someone to become ready while you keep bleeding quietly. And that's why the lesson can feel cruel, because you didn't ask for it. But it is also sacred because it wakes you up. So if you are asking why you were brought into an avoidance life, you were brought in to hold up a mirror, not with judgment, but with truth. You were brought in to show what real connection looks like and what fear does to it when fear is left unhealed. You were brought in to remind yourself that love is not supposed to be a maze. Love is not supposed to be a guessing game. Love is not supposed to be something you chase until you lose yourself. And if your presence revealed their avoidance, then let your boundaries reveal your worth. Let the mirror turn back toward you, and let you finally choose a love that chooses you back. You need to understand, sometimes you are brought into an avoidance life so you can wake up. Not because you were broken, not because you were wrong, but because you were ready to stop confusing love with self-abandonment. And I know that sentence can sting, because you didn't go into it thinking you would lose parts of yourself. You went in thinking love would make you more alive. You went in thinking this would be mutual, that you would be met with the same effort you were giving, the same tenderness you were offering, the same loyalty you were living. But what happened slowly and quietly is that you started bending your own heart to fit inside someone else's fear. You need to understand, loving an avoidant can feel like trying to hold water in your hands. You feel it, it's there, it's real, and yet it keeps slipping away. One day they're close, warm, present. The next day they're distant, distracted, unreachable. They give you a look that feels like home, then they disappear like you imagined it. And because you have a big heart, you don't immediately label it as what it is. You call it stress. You call it overwhelm. You call it, they're just not good at emotions. You call it timing. You call it bad experiences. You call it anything that allows you to keep hoping. Because hope is beautiful, but when hope becomes your excuse to tolerate pain, hope starts costing you your peace. So you adapt. You start speaking softer. You start asking for less. You start saying, it's okay, before you even know if it is. You start waiting instead of living. You start checking your phone with that tight feeling in your chest, not because you're weak, but because you've been trained by inconsistency to expect relief when they finally show up again. And that's the trap. Inconsistency doesn't just hurt, it conditions you. It makes you feel like small moments of attention are big love. It makes you feel like being chosen again is proof you matter, even if you were dismissed yesterday. And slowly, without realizing it, you start working for love like it's a job, like you have to earn the right to be treated well. You need to understand this is where the awakening begins, because at some point you look at yourself and you don't recognize the version of you that is living like this. You realize you've been managing their moods. You've been timing your messages. You've been rehearsing your needs so they sound less demanding. You've been editing your emotions so you don't scare them. You've been acting like your heart is a problem that needs to be controlled instead of a gift that deserves care. And that realization is painful because it forces you to face the truth. You were not just loving them, you were losing yourself. And then something happens, and it's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's one quiet moment. A night where you're alone again while they're busy. A morning where you realize you're anxious before you even open your eyes. A conversation where you ask for the bare minimum and they make you feel like it's too much. Or a moment where they pull away and you catch yourself about to chase, about to explain, about to beg for crumbs. And for the first time you stop. You stop. And you feel how tired you are. Not tired of them as a person, tired of the cycle. tired of being the only one fighting for clarity, tired of being the only one trying to repair, tired of carrying both sides of the connection. And you finally admit something to yourself. This isn't love if it keeps turning me into someone I don't like. You need to understand that awakening is why you were brought into their life. Not to suffer, but to see. Not to be punished, but to become honest. Loving an avoidant often reveals the difference between compassion and self-sacrifice. Compassion says, I understand your fear. Self-sacrifice says, I will suffer so you don't have to face it. Compassion says, I can care about you. Self-sacrifice says, I will abandon myself to keep you. And you were brought into this dynamic so you could learn the line between the two, because once you learn it, you will never unlearn it. You need to understand this is also why you start setting boundaries, not as a threat, but as a rescue. You stop trying to interpret their silence as love. You stop translating their distance into excuses that make it hurt less. You stop calling mixed signals depth. You stop waiting for potential. You start asking for reality. You start asking for consistency. You start asking for emotional safety. Because you realize that love is not supposed to feel like a guessing game. Love is not supposed to make you feel small. Love is not supposed to train you to accept less. And this is where your heart gets tested, because the moment you wake up, your old self will try to pull you back. Your memories will tempt you. The good moments will replay like a highlight reel. The loneliness will whisper, maybe you should try again. The attachment will beg, just one more conversation, just one more chance. But your awakening will speak louder, and it will say, I have already given enough chances for the pattern to change. I have already explained enough for you to understand. I have already loved enough to prove my sincerity. If love was the missing ingredient, it would have worked by now. You need to understand you were brought into their life to learn how to choose yourself without hatred. That is the real power, to say, I don't need to villainize you to leave. I don't need to pretend you never mattered. I can honor what was real and still accept what was missing. I can miss you and still move forward. I can love you and still refuse to lose myself. That is maturity. That is healing. That is what many people never learn because they keep chasing the same emotional pattern in different bodies, hoping it will end differently. But you are waking up. You are breaking the loop. So, if you're asking why you were brought into an avoidance life, you were brought in to experience an awakening that will protect you for the rest of your life. You were brought in to learn that your heart is not too much, it's simply meant for someone who can hold it. You were brought in to learn that love is not proven through endurance, love is proven through consistency. You were brought in to learn that peace is not something you find by being endlessly understanding, peace is something you protect by being honest. And when you walk away from what hurts you, you don't lose love, you stop losing yourself. You need to understand real love requires courage, not chemistry, not tension, not the thrill of being chosen one day and ignored the next. Courage. Courage to stay present when it's uncomfortable, courage to speak when silence would be easier, courage to repair instead of disappearing, courage to be seen fully without running. And if you were brought into an avoidance life, it's often because your love stood right in front of that missing courage and it quietly asked a question they could not avoid forever. Will you choose intimacy or will you keep choosing safety through distance? You need to understand an avoidant can feel deeply, but feeling deeply is not the same as being able to hold closeness. Some people have big emotions but small capacity. They can miss you, they can crave you, they can think about you at night, they can even love you in their own way. But when love asks for consistency, when it asks for vulnerability, when it asks for accountability, their fear speaks louder than their desire. So they retreat, they shut down, they become vague, they disappear behind work, stress, space, not being ready, anything that allows them to avoid the moment where they have to show up emotionally. And then you are left with the most painful contradiction. You can feel that they care, and yet you are still not being cared for in the way you need. You need to understand this is where your heart can get trapped because you start chasing the potential. You start loving the version of them you see in flashes. You start building a future out of a few good moments, and you tell yourself, if they can be that loving sometimes, then it must be in there. And yes, it is in there. But being in there is not the same as being chosen. A relationship is not built on what someone can do on their best day. It is built on what they consistently choose, especially on hard days. And that's where courage is revealed, because courage is not a feeling. Courage is a decision. It's a commitment to show up even when your nervous system wants to run. You need to understand your presence in their life often becomes the moment where love stops being theoretical for them. You are not a fantasy they can control. You are not an idea they can keep at a distance. You are a real person with real needs. You want clarity. You want steadiness. You want to be spoken to with warmth, not silence. You want to be chosen in daylight, not only missed in the dark. And that forces a fork in the road. Either they rise to the courage love requires, or they retreat into the comfort of avoidance. And if they retreat, it is not because you were unworthy, it is because they were unwilling to face the discomfort of growth. You need to understand, there is a heartbreaking truth in this. You can inspire courage in someone, but you cannot replace it for them. You can be gentle, you can be patient, you can be understanding, you can love them in a way that feels like safety, but you cannot do the inner work on their behalf. You cannot make them communicate when silence is their habit. You cannot make them be consistent when inconsistency is their refuge. You cannot make them repair when disappearing is how they regulate. And the longer you try to pull courage out of someone who will not choose it, the more you begin sacrificing your own courage, the courage to protect your heart, the courage to walk away from confusion, the courage to stop calling pain love. You need to understand, this is often why you were brought into their life, because your love is the kind that asks for something real. And that request, even when spoken softly, exposes everything. It exposes whether they can meet you. It exposes whether they are ready. It exposes whether they are capable of the kind of intimacy you're offering. And the most important thing it reveals is this: love without courage becomes a cycle of closeness and withdrawal, a cycle of hope and disappointment, a cycle of you reaching and them retreating, a cycle that can make you feel like you're always one conversation away from the relationship you want, when in reality, you are one boundary away from the peace you need. You need to understand, when courage isn't chosen, you must choose yourself. Not with anger, not with revenge, not with cruelty, with clarity, with dignity, with that quiet strength that says, I can love you and still refuse to lose myself. I can care about you and still admit that this connection is not safe for my heart. I can understand your fear and still stop volunteering to be hurt by it. Because the truth is, your empathy is beautiful, but your empathy is not a substitute for someone else's emotional responsibility. And you need to understand, choosing yourself will feel strange at first, because when you've been overgiving, boundaries feel like betrayal. When you've been waiting, walking away feels like quitting. When you've been hoping, accepting reality feels like losing. But it's not losing, it's waking up, it's finally allowing the truth to be the truth. It's finally letting your nervous system rest. It's finally stepping out of the emotional guessing game and into a life where love is not something you earn through endurance. You need to understand, if they ever come back, the only thing that matters is not their words, not their sudden tenderness, not their late night missing you, but their courage. Do they communicate? Do they take accountability? Do they show consistent effort? Do they repair what they broke? Do they stay present when it gets uncomfortable? Because real love does not return to repeat the same cycle. Real love returns with change. And if that change is not there, then the bravest thing you can do is not to reopen the door. It is to keep walking forward. You need to understand, your role in their life was to reveal what love requires. Your role in your own life is to accept what you require. You require steadiness. You require clarity. You require emotional safety. You require someone who doesn't just feel for you, but shows up for you. And if an avoidant cannot choose that courage, then the lesson is not that love failed. The lesson is that love asked for courage, and you chose yours by choosing yourself.